Welcome you all to Integrated Theology. And this is the third class entitled Theotic Missiology, where we study divine mindsets or the mind of the divine or the spiritual. Today's lecture, lecture 4, we're going to talk about the form of pneumatics. The form of pneumatics. Again, I am your host, Bishop Dr. Terry K. Reeves. Let's dive right into our lecture for today. Form as a noun can refer to the shape or the state of existence. God is both spirit and omnipresent, and yet he is said to have form. And so in the minds of human beings, it's almost impossible to consider an infinite form that is immaterial. We have no concept of that type of life because our reference to the living is always bound to those things that have physicality. And so Paul reveals to the Philippians in chapter 2, verse 6, the following: who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, speaking of Jesus. Other versions of this text record the following: the ABP, which is the, I believe, Apostolic Bible Polyglot, which they combine different languages, who in the appearance of God, existing not, a seizure esteemed it to be equal with God. In other words, he was not taking anything by force, and that equality was already there. The CEV version says, Christ was truly God, but he did not try to remain equal with God. The Darby version says, who subsisting in the form of God did not esteem it an object of rapine or seizing by force to be on an equality with God. The GNR version, he always had the nature of God, but he did not think that by force he should try to remain equal with God. The ISV, in God's own form existed he, and shared with God equality. Deed, nothing need grasping or taking by force. Murdoch's Bible, who as he was in the likeness of God, deemed it no trespass to be co-equal with God. The Remedy version of the New Testament, who though by his very nature has always been God, did not use his divine power, might, knowledge, or other prerogatives to promote himself. The TS 2009 version, who being in the form of Elohim, did not regard equality with Elohim a matter to be grasped. So most versions interpret the form of God as image, a form or similitude, or nature. And this is very important. Form designates nature. And it designates nature that can be observed by the senses or experienced by the senses. So form appears to be associated with nature. Form, again, the visible shape or configuration of something, a particular way in which a thing exists or appears, or the manifestation of it. Remember, when we talk about nature, natura, or natus, it comes from birth, and it really speaks of how a thing exists and everything that it is. And so form and nature seem to be equivalent, and that's very important. God has form, and therefore he has nature. Form is in the Greek morphe, and form then deals with the form, the outward appearance. It can speak of shape and, again, nature. Very important. So morphe comes from the word meros, and meros deals with parts, pieces, a fragment, a portion, or a part of the whole. And it indicates then that form is just one aspect of the being of the nature. Nature, as it relates to other things that are created, is a collective of all the pieces that make it who and what it is. But when we speak of the form of God and we speak of a piece or a part of the whole, we're talking about now manifestational and functional. Because with God, you have to understand that infinity can be functionally understood, and it can also be understood as not having any pieces. And so simplicity, simplistic monadic essence can have functionality of differentiation. In other words, I have one hammer. I can use the hammer to pull a nail out. I can use the hammer to bust the nail in or to break up something. One hammer, but uniquely different methods of functionality. So again, form is usually, and form generally, deals with the visible shape or configuration of something. It can deal with the particular way in which a thing exists, appears, or manifests itself. The definition of nature deals with kind or state of existence, the inherent qualities, characteristics, or fundamental makeup of something or someone. It can deal with the way a thing is by its very essence, including its inherent or inbuilt tendencies and behaviors. It can deal with the state of being. It can deal with that state of being without external influence. In other words, how you are without things impacting you from outside of you. And so it also can deal with qualities of something at birth that determines its kind. For a special note, as a point of clarity, God was never born. Therefore, nature describes the totality of all that God is in his being or his existence. If God has form, morphe, he has something that can be seen if he so desires. Now, the only problem with being able to be seen is that you can never invite someone into the state of omnipresence or into the state of infinitum. Therefore, everything that can be seen of God can only be seen in a manifestational way. And so the morphe of God that can be seen by direct vision, by only those who are infinite. It can be seen by revelatory manifestation, which basically is every created being that observes God and has interaction with God. And because he is invisible to lower life forms, he cannot be visibly seen by them. Therefore, the form of God is out of reach. The absolute form of God cannot be dealt with, imagined, visualized, or compensated by our sensory mechanisms. He is beyond our finding out through our senses. He is beyond our finding out even by way of our mental acuity or mental senses. Because he is again omnipresent and infinite, only those who are infinite and omnipresent can experience his true visage and being. Everything else is simply a manifestation where God extends to us grace to even begin to deal with him, understand him, interact with him. And so the form of God is his external visage, and at the same time, monadic, simplicity, made of one thing. And when we say made, we're not talking about the actual fabrication of his being, but the content of his being. Even though that content is eternal, never came into existence, the uncaused causer, he still has substantial reality that just happens to be immaterial spirit. And at the same time, he is extra dimensional and he is immaterial. Extra dimensional immateriality then is so far above material physical existence. And we don't know how many really dimensions God has, because it's estimated that Christ in his incarnate form may have a dimensionality of 12 dimensions at least, which means a four-dimensional creation to humans would be as a God being able to see through you, hear your thoughts, transport themselves at thought, move in and out of dimensions at any time, to reach inside you, take things out, put things in. They would be able to be invisible and be able to appear anywhere. And so they would literally be divine in our understanding, and that's an angel. And so with God, and we don't know how many dimensions truly exist, what are the dimensions in what we call ultimate reality? And of course, the ultimate reality is the person of God. And he even created and extended through his word and his thought the heavens of heaven, that expansive space that is beyond our calculation, beyond our understanding, and beyond human science. He is also omnipresent, and God is omnipresent spirit being or immaterial being. So he's everywhere. Now, these are two things. Either he is essentially everywhere, and I don't like to say essential as it deals with God or the essence of God, except we use it in what we call a functionality, because essence always comes from substance, and essence then is the smaller or the less of the greater of substance. Substantial reality holds all things together. Essence is derived from substance, because hypostasis, it literally provides the platform by which essence can exist. And so when we speak of the essence of God, we're only speaking of not quote unquote substantial essence, because that means parts. Escheatology, the study of body, soul, and spirit, the nature of man as it works together. And so when we speak of the essential reality of God or the essence of God, we're speaking of the functionality of the mind. The mind has intellect or cognition. The mind, and I don't like to say has, because his mind is cognition. His mind is the standard of emoticism. His mind is ultimate will, because it is the first of all of its kind. Because form is distinguished from its material, the form of God is the manner in which God reveals or manifests himself functionally. The form of God, the nature of God, the only way we can perceive his presence is he is functioning, and somehow we see the result of God being there. Whether that result can be the impact of the heaviness of the atmosphere, we feel the atmosphere being filled with some type of power that is inducing an emotive state, an intellectual state, or a volitional state. Form can be said to be the arrangement by which he manifests himself as a spirit. Remember, spirit, and it's the more I study, the more it goes into concepts that are so foreign to us that we don't understand, because one aspect of spirit is mind, but another aspect of spirit is what we call breath, or a volitional exertion. And so we're talking about a mind that can exert its fluence, its potentiality, its power. And when I mean potentiality with God, I'm talking about the potence, the ability to operate in power. And so spirit, breath, mind, it's as if we're saying that a spirit then is a mind that is like a current of air. It goes wherever it wants to. It can move in any dimension it wants to. It is, or I should say, he is what? Knowledgeable of himself, his will, his desires, and through his current of air, he releases his thoughts, and his thoughts, or the logos, then become, as they are considered in his mind, they become rhematic thoughts that pull the energy out of God and give solidification to everything he thinks. The very first power, the power of spontaneous generation. And when I mean the very first power, there are powers that go beyond the active powers of God or the kinetic powers of God, because he has power to exist in and of himself without the need of any externalized thing. But the very first power that is extended is the power of spontaneous creation through his thought. And again, I hesitate because you'll get a lot of discussion with this that's not friendly. Does God have to verbalize? If there is no vacuum, can sound be even uttered? And so I believe that the language of the Spirit is thought. That's why when God speaks to people in the gathering, they understand him in their own language. He can speak to all of us through a word and through an interpreter, or unless God interprets himself, we yet understand him, because thoughts take us to patterns. And no matter what the language is, the pattern of the thing is basically the same. A dog is a dog, no matter what language you say it in. A rose is a rose. And so the only thing that ties communication together with God and man is we're able to comprehend him in our thoughts. And so form can be said to be the arrangement by which he manifests himself as a spirit. This arrangement allows all other sentient beings to experience him by sensory mechanisms of the body, or the senses of the spirit. Sensory mechanisms of the body: sight, smell, touch, hearing, taste. Sensory mechanisms of the spirit are what we would call consideration of probing or knowing by way of the spirit, which is revelatory knowledge. So the spirit can operate in knowledge. The spirit can operate in emotive things. The spirit can operate in decisive things, or the will. And the spirit can also operate in transposing us into unique, different dimensions. Volitional arrangement of material into a personification of their individuality is one of the powers of pneumatic beings as it relates to their form. So they can, by will, arrange their spiritual essence and they can personify themselves in a form that is conducive to their jobs or to their mission. The form gives display of personhood. Again, eschatologically, we don't fall in love with the mind of a person first because we don't see their mind. There's something about the externalized image that we see that draws us in and gives us a desire to want to relate. And as we begin to forge a relationship, we then begin to understand those aspects that they reveal about themselves to us. We begin to learn of the manifestation of their thoughts, emotions, and will. Not that people always are truthful with what they show you about themselves, but you begin to understand. And their feelings, their thoughts, their volition, you now associated with form, structure, complexion, hair, eyes, lips, touch, how they talk. And all of that is the substance for forging relationships and connections. Form allows for emerging and relating to one another. You begin to emerge and come forth as who you are, and most people do it very delicately. They don't jump right out most of the time to reveal who they are because they're very concerned. Will this person accept me as for who I am? And so God is also very concerned. He wants to forge a relationship, but can we take him if he reveals all of himself to us? We typically are not love at all cost or not love at all. We are discriminately very careful on how we relate to every external being, even God. We're very careful how we approach him because we don't know if he's going to ask more of us than what we are able to give. And that precedent always keeps us backing off. And God so desires to give all of himself, but we are not accustomed to being totally receptive of all that a person is. If a person begins on the first time you come together to divulge their whole life history, you'll say, whoa, too much, and you may back off or totally disappear. So the form is attached to, for the purpose of discovering the personality. Personality is how then do I display my substantial reality? How then do I navigate? What are the protocols of my being? Special note here, interaction with the form produces specific levels of commitment, attachment, and fondness. I don't fall in love with your mind first. There is something that is attached to it. And when I see the expressions and I see the protocols and I see the decorum of the form, and if the mind, which is again the intellect, the emotion, and the will, is palatable to me, I draw in closer. I connect closer. Some people get stuck in the connection of the human body, and so they fall in love with the form and not knowing what's in the form. And that's why, in many cases, people can become disappointed because the form doesn't balance out with personality. And that's why, and I don't remember the terminology, but there is a type of love, or I'll say a perspective of love, that I can love you because you envision to me all that I imagine. But when I get to know you, immediately I drop you, because as long as you was or you were an imaginative perfection, then I could adore you from afar. But in relating to you and you become just another human, I'm very disappointed in you. And so I drop that relationship. And it's very interesting. And a lot of that is surfacing now. Aspirations of longing to be with somebody. And I believe that's one of the things we saw about David's son, how he violated his own sister, even though she was half-sister. He had to have her. And then when he got her, he despised her and cast her out. The morphe, or the form of pneumatics, is volitional manifestation that will reveal the personality. So it is very good that their nature then is to reveal the personality through whatever they take upon themselves. Their form is not something that is conclusively stable. Because if you have the capacity to shift at all times as it relates to how you worship, how you serve God, then what is your true form? Your true form could be an omnimorphic form, the capacity to take forms. And so you are not rigid in your existence because you were created to display glory to God by the shifting and the manipulation of your own essence. Jesus concludes something very, very important. That is the basics of spiritual nature. He said, "Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I, myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as you see me have." He never said blood. Why did he say bones? Well, to dispel the myth that angels may bleed is because the bone is the cradle of the blood. All blood cells come from the bone. All dying blood cells go back into the bone marrow and new blood cells are created. And so it's very interesting here. It's very important to understand this statement because it gives foundational understanding of the nature of spiritual entities. Jesus says they do not have flesh, which is sarx. They do not have human nature that is static. At one time, Jesus said, "Which of you can change your stature with a thought?" He didn't say that he could. He said, "Which of you?" And so angels can change size, they can change construct, they can change imagery. And I don't believe that they consistently look like men. They appear as men. That doesn't mean that that is their form. So he says they do not have flesh, human nature, or the human frame, and bones. Here the Greek term is osteon, and it simply means bone. All throughout the New Testament, bone means bone. So there's very little information. To find out what bone is, you have to go to the Old Testament, which is the word etsim or estem, and it means bone, essence, or substance. Bone is the essence that allows substantial reality to be formed, to consist, to operate in the physical world. It means body, limbs, members, external body. So the bones then are the framework that holds the human form together. It is the undergirding or the substantial material reality that enables the human form to function within the laws of reality. Without bones, we would be like an amoeba, a slime, a puddle of goo that just sits there unless we were able to move beyond the physicality and then to morph into minciological beings that have minciological reality that is connected to our powers of thought. And in such case, a living mind composed of energy that can think and shift its behavior and the external world around it, we would not know how to deal with it. Bone can mean substance or self, and it can also deal with life, because in the bone is the blood, and in the blood is the life of the soul. The ERV states the following: a ghost, in parentheses, spirit, does not have a body like this. The rendering can be said in the following manner: a spirit does not exist with a body as I have. Very important. So we know that a spirit is not just like a man, because they don't have a physical human body as he has. And this reveals several things. He was not an angel. He was not the archangel Michael, but he was literally born of a woman through the bequeathing of that life and that humanity by God. So, pneumatic beings are immaterial spirits, immaterial mental, volitional exertions of reality like winds. They are non-human and therefore not earth-bound. Is it possible for an angelic being to soar through the celestial galaxies because they don't have a body that is tempered, that needs a certain type of air to breathe? According to the scripture, the Bible says he created them by the breath of his mouth. So do angels have to breathe if they are created substantially from breath? Breath simply means that which keeps us conscious. That's which enables humans to think, to be alive. And so angelic beings then are alive because they are divine breath, divine sentient beings composed of the exertion of the very reality of God and the mind of God that became rheumatic, that produced spiritual being, spiritual functional bodies that are not material or composed as we are. They are extra-dimensional by nature, which includes inner existence and form that contains functional existence. Their form is functional. Their form is existent. Their form contains a functionality where they can exert their own individuality and personality. And so a term that describes their nature and their ability: mutans forma, transfigurans or transformans, shape shifters. One, and I don't mean shape shifters in the human sense where we have dog people or skinwalkers. These individuals don't need skin. They can molecularize whatever form they need with their thought. Very important, because you're talking about now you can adapt to things that solidify you in the real world, which means you can adapt and control atomic structures, molecules, and produce things that have human qualities where you can wrestle with individuals, you can wrestle with people, and you can eat food that does not drop through your body. Remember, form is the equivalent to nature. And so if we talk about mutans forma, or transfigurans, or transformans, we're talking about those who have a nature that is composite only in the sense that it can adapt forms, controlling molecules, atoms, physical matter, and they can take it upon themselves. And if we say that they can adapt to forms, is it possible that in the adaptation of these forms, they are also taking on the likeness of their natures? If form is equivalent to nature, when I adapt a form, am I to a degree assuming the nature that comes with that form? And the only way that I can move beyond that form's nature is to retain the nature of my pneumaticism, of being a spirit. So remember, form is the equivalent to nature. Pneumatics, by their nature, can shift their form. So if form equals nature, when I shift my form, do I shift my abilities to function in a specific nature? Very important question. It is their nature to transform their form and to adapt to the fundamental functionality of the assumed form. The men at Sodom saw something through those gowns or robes that they wore that made them want to know them in an intimate way. And so they were beings who appeared to have hips, private parts that could be visualized and romanticized and imagined. And that's why the people wanted them. Are we to believe that angels transformed themselves, didn't have hands, didn't have legs, didn't have shoulders, didn't have chest, didn't have neck, didn't have pretty teeth? Did the angels come with rotten teeth, hooked back, stooped, bug-eyed, and club-footed? So pneumatics appear to be able to transform their spiritual form and function within the form in accordance to the nature of that assumed form. And I'm going to stop right here. I think I've given you quite a bit to consider today.